representation and ethnicity in mainstream superhero comics. And so, Ronald, if you can tell us a little bit about where the comic came from, what the incident that inspired it, and also the response that you heard from people about it.
Yeah, it came from a relatively innocuous event, I guess you would say, like at least in regard to intent, when an editor asked me to lighten the skin color of a character. Which I don't think, you know, if we're talking about intent, I don't think it was intentionally meaning to make anyone feel a type of way, but it just, to me, it illuminated a bit of kind of the false construct of race, or like, why would you even ask someone to do that? Like, why is it a big deal when, like, I have other characters that are completely changing their colors and shade? Why was it so important to maintain a certain, you know, shade to this one character? Right. You know, right. It wasn't for print reasons, and in the end, I didn't do it anyway. So, like, it just made me. It wasn't like, ha, that was racist. It was more like, like, why are we even talking about it? Like, why would this even be a thing? You know, and I used it as an opportunity to kind of like break down why it is ridiculous. You know, and that's what the essay was about. I don't know what
you have. So you know, you talk about in the comic. You talk about this intersection between ethnicity and racial identity, or skin tone and ethnicity, or and then you've got a panel that kind of gives a great example of that, because the editor, as I understand it, said that this character was like one part of her ethnic mix was Latina, but you're like, well, what color is that?
Right. Because what color is Latina? Like, I mean, I just thought it was funny. Like, I kind of said that back to the editor, and just as a joke, almost kind of like, okay, let's just not, you know, this is unimportant. Like, I'm not going to change this. It's ridiculous, right? Yeah. And thought I would get a laugh, but the response was one where I guess they tried to use reason to kind of, you know, like, oh yeah, no, well, this character is, you know, black and black and Mexican, or black and like, and I'm like, well, does it really matter? You know, like, is it a part of the character, the tone of their skin? You know, are we going to talk about that in the comic? Right. If not, like, it really shouldn't matter. Like, there's a full range, and honestly, my lens as the creator, it's like I could color the character however I feel like it. It's not like I'm making Hulk, who is green, into Hulk, who is pink. And then at the end, when you get to the end here, I actually I used the actual swatches that I used in one comic book of the Hulk. You know, they call her She-Hulk. I call her Hulk because And I chose the hex codes because, like, as I work, I'll use a lot of different variations of tone and shade on characters as I work even. And I kind of wanted to, and I'm working for web. In this case, I was working for web. It's a web comic. So, like, I wanted to use one of the formal elements of color online to demonstrate how shade and tone is even just a matter of perspective. You know, so like this character, actually the character changed color throughout the comic. Like, it's just as if you had a palette where you were mixing some color on the palette. Like, you know, it would vary a little bit. You wouldn't have an even tone altogether. So that's why I used the hex to kind of add a formal element to the subject matter.
Oh, well, I've heard a great comment from a visitor who really responded to this comic and really seemed to appreciate, you know, what it was talking about, and it raised some issues that, you know, that maybe are kind of underneath the surface, right, in a lot of mainstream comics. But the comment was, you know, that this hex code system for identifying colors online, that's a constructed system to sort of categorize and label and separate colors. And for this visitor, that was how they saw that, you know, that intersection of skin tone and race and that labeling, where as long as you can put somebody in a category and a label, then it's separate. You know it's not that, it's not that, it's this, and then you think that, you know, within that system, then there's a whole lot of associations that come along with that. And they just thought that that was a really brilliant kind of link and a metaphorical illustration for how race and skin tone works in America. So, you know, it was kind of a brilliant technique.
Yeah, I would love to talk. That guess sounds like they're a hit.
We have smart visitors here.
Yeah.
We got great visitors.
Yeah.
So one thing, now when we installed this comic, you know, of course it was an online comic originally. And we printed it in this long line, but then we also included some of the online comments that were generated from various websites that reposted the comic. And I know in at least one situation that we have on the wall, you actually responded to one of the commenters.
Yeah, I just couldn't let it ride.
No, yeah, and your response was brilliant and very clear, but I guess I wanted to ask you about, because I know you're very present online, and you see comments and get involved with discussions.
Yeah, I'm too present online.
But what's that like to constantly be in contact, or at least kind of exposed to your readers?
You know, I was thinking about it today. I was thinking about it the other day. It's like, this is the first generation, and it's a different type of generation because like lots of people are responding to online in a different way. Like looking at you know, he had to come up looking at Trump, right? Like he's on Twitter at like 3 a.m. or something, right? He's an old man. He's from like the Fame generation, right? He used to hang out at Studio 54. This idea of like presence is different, it's proximal, right? And then it disappears once you leave the club or whatever, right? And I was just thinking about, well, this presidential election is going to be like when you saw Nixon sweating. You know, like you had TV. TV was a new thing. And like the internet, all of this is kind of new. Like for me, it's new. So like maybe I don't even know, I'm saying like maybe I don't even know what the answer to your question will be until we're like deeper into this moment in history. You know? So like on Tumblr, for instance, I have Tumblrs that are essentially the mood boards for the work that I'm doing. It's like if you go online and you search like Prince of Cats on Tumblr, or like even my projects that I'm working on right now, you're gonna see essentially, or if you search a hashtag on my Tumblr, you're gonna see like images and sort of the things that I'm kind of like pulling from to create the work, you know? And I think that's like a legit form of expression too, you know? So I think, you know, depending on how deep you want to go, you want to know my politics, you probably want to go on Facebook, you know, see something, right? Like if you want to just see pictures, go on Instagram. I'm not going to talk too much about it, you know, I'm just putting up most of the pictures. I think it allows for people to control the amount of exposure they want to have to the people that they're interested in, you know? And then I think that's good and bad, actually. I mean, I have a friend who's just like, oh, you know, they wish that they're staying off of online. And I understand it. There's a false sense of familiarity that can create, can be pretty negative. Right. Because like, even though you have this person in front of you quite often, and you have the ability to just reach out to them, you really don't know them.
Right.
You know.
Right.
But not everyone understands that.
Yeah. Then I see there's a phenomenon that goes along with that where someone may be not just a reader of yours, because for a reader, they can see, you know, they can go online and see your thinking process, they get a sense of your personality, your own personal story, and that can maybe enrich their experience of reading your work. Yeah. But then that can cross over to where they're a fan. And then at that point, it seems like it can be, well, what I've seen, you know, I've seen this thing online where someone like can be a little bit too much of a fan, and then the artist, you know, who they're a fan of does something that offends them personally, and then it just all that can flip very quickly, right? So then they're not being critical about your work. Yeah. They're sort of trying to like judge your personality as if they really know you.
Yeah, and it's weird, man. I'm like, what's a fan? You know what I mean? Like I'm starting to like, what is a fan? You know, like there's a lot of fan culture, and I wonder if it wouldn't, you know, it wouldn't be good for us to maybe take a step back from it and think about like, okay, well, everything is just a thing that you're kind of observing and enjoying. You know, like this hyper consumption of things to the, you know, like that sort of relationship I think is good for commerce, but I don't know how good it is for even viewing art or stories. You know, like maybe it's more about just like, okay, each time I'm gonna come at something, like it's the first time I'm coming at it, and like, you know, well, gauging if I like it or not, or maybe that's not even important, maybe just like gauging what I'm thinking about it, you know, and kind of viewing things like that. The fan element, like, is good. It's like everyone, I guess you need fans. Fans, like, pay your bills, but I much rather, I enjoy to talk to people who actually maybe aren't even fans of comics or fans of illustration. They're just like, oh, I like this. What is it? Interesting. Will I like the next thing that has its label? Maybe not. Right. You know, but like I like this because I look at things, and every time I look at something, I decide whether or not I like it. Right. You know, if that makes sense, I don't know. Maybe that doesn't make sense.
For sure. And I know you're interested in you know, anyone who's familiar with your work knows that you're interested in areas of culture that may apparently not have anything to do with comics, but you synthesize a lot of. You analyze and kind of synthesize and put together things from many different sources to create something that I think is kind of especially identified with you. And the best example of that, I think, is Prince of Cats, or at least it's the example that I was first exposed to. And of course, Prince of Cats has just been republished in a nice big edition that is, I think, is met your approval as the original artist.
I mean, it has to meet my approval because I did a lot of the book design. Yeah, man. Well, you know, going back to like watching Jidaigeki, you know, just like period dramas, which I can't even say like I'm a fan of, but I'm a fan of like a few after watching it. Right.
So
Yeah,
like,
so
what
the
is
closest thing? Well, in this case, I'll probably bring up Kurosawa. Like Kurosawa's Ran and Kurosawa's Oran and Kurosawa's Throne of Blood. And they were like two of the first. It's weird to call them a staging of Shakespeare. It's kind of right, same story, but so much of Shakespeare, I guess Shakespeare is like language, performance, and story. So like their performance and story, but like not language, right? So, but that was definitely my first experience like with King Lear, and I think that definitely shaped some of the semiotics, like that, you know, of Prince of Cats, like symbols, things that you see, like things that maybe speak to like a violent culture, you know, and like death, people chopping each other off, you know, pride, you know, like the pride of certain things. Yeah.
I think maybe you know, there's always this kind of tension between the reputation of Shakespeare as being kind of like something that's fancy and refined, and the reality of a lot of Shakespeare, where it's bawdy, and it's like incredibly violent and a lot more kind of raw than I think people.
I mean, that's what was dope. Like the aristocracy and the streets could be in the same, you know, place watching this story, you know, and they were both a part of it. Like one of the things that, speaking of high and low, right? He had both high and low in his works, you know, and so he gets criticism for, you know, from some people for, I guess maybe being a little bit, or people think of it as being kind of like snooty, but not at all. I think maybe the difference in language is what does it, you know. People are like, I don't understand this. This is like hard to penetrate, but no, it's, you know, it's kind of just loose stories and simple stories. But I think where they get complex is in the constraints that he gave himself in terms of language and what he was doing with poetry. You know, that's when it starts to get like, oh, okay, this guy's like, he's got bars, like he's an MC, right?
Where on the surface, the opposite could be said to be true of a lot of MCs. You'd be like, okay, well, he's not talking about anything. But then when you look at the language structure and what someone's doing with rhyme and meter and timing and like the manipulation of language, and you're like, oh, okay, well, this guy who was just talking about, like, I don't know, cocaine, is actually having a really, he's doing some complex stuff with language. I thought he was just talking about, you know, ise miyake and like cocaine, but like he's actually quite brilliant when it comes to Shakespeare is like that. This is, you know, the opposite is true. Maybe in like, you know, 400 years we'll look back on like ASAP Mob and be like, oh wow, this is Hootie too.
Yeah. So, you know what, I hadn't really thought about this, but I've heard a lot of people recommend, like, if you want to appreciate Shakespeare, or if you're having trouble reading the words and having them make sense, try to see it live, or try to hear like a live reading of it at least, because it's made to be spoken. It's a language that's made to be spoken out loud.
Yeah, no,
But I was wondering about your book, and if you've ever done live readings of it, because I think that would be really interesting.
not yet, but like, you know, we'll hold on that maybe soon. Yeah. I want to definitely pursue that. Because I think that's what brings it to life too, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm certainly interested in that. That's how you have to see Shakespeare. Like, this is also comics. So, like, you know, when people say, is it a remake of, or, no, it's not, because it's a completely different format, you know, and it's native to a completely different format. It's not like I wrote it to be performed. I wrote it natively to comics. The poetic form of is evident in here. I think you actually have like a sequence